Democracy is a term heavily used to describe the land of America. It means rule by the people. And according to USCIS, the US is described as a democracy in which citizens vote for their elected officials. Now, on paper, that might sound like what the US practices, but in reality, that's just not the case. The US does not operate as a democracy because the government is systematically trying to suppress voting rights to harm communities in the minority. Voter suppression laws are used to impact the outcome of an election by discouraging or preventing specific groups of people from voting. Some groups are disproportionately affected by voter suppression tactics, like Native American voters do not have access to nearby polling locations and many reservations. In South Dakota, 32% of Native voters cite travel distance as a factor in deciding whether or not to vote. Using survey research, a group called Democracy Funds Voter found that only 7% of white people were forced to wait over an hour to vote compared to 13% of African Americans. And to make it worse, in Georgia, lawmakers made it a crime to provide food and water to voters standing in line at the polls. This is very targeted, seeing as though Georgia is notorious for having long lines, especially in communities of color. With polling places getting shut down and thinner staffing on the remaining sites, that can mean longer lines, which in return could shrink voter turnout. Another form of voter suppression is mandatory IDs. 36 states have identification requirements at the polls, and 7 states have strict photo ID laws, meaning voters must present a government-issued ID in order to cast a regular ballot. This can be a significant burden on people in lower-income communities and also affect people with disabilities. The travel required to obtain an ID is an obstacle, and this can also apply to the elderly and people living in rural areas. And IDs can't always be accessible to everyone. They can also be costly, and even if they are free, it costs to get the documents needed to obtain an ID. The actions of the government and the laws that are being passed negate the idea that this is the land of the free, where voting is the only way to have your voice heard. For America to be seen as a true democracy, we cannot silence a vast group of people and still uphold this image that the US is governed by the people when not all people are being represented.